My name is Claire, I'm 45 years old, and until recently I thought my life was perfectly normal. I've been married to James for 15 years. We don't have children, but we both have successful careers. Our relationship has always been stable, maybe a little predictable lately, but nothing that gave me any real cause for concern, or so I thought, until that fateful night. It was a Saturday like any other. My sister, Emily, had thrown a family dinner to celebrate the 23rd birthday of her eldest son, my nephew, Ethan. Ethan has always been a charming, intelligent, and surprisingly mature young man. Ever since we were little, we've had a special bond. I was his favorite aunt, and he was my spoiled nephew. Since I never had children, Ethan filled that space in my heart. The dinner was wonderful. The food was amazing. The wine flowed freely, and the house was full of laughter. James, as usual, had had a bit too much to drink, not that he was a heavy drinker. But at family gatherings, he always seemed to lose control. By the end of the night, as people were starting to leave, James could barely stand. "Claire," he drawled, leaning closer to me, his voice thick and his eyes glassy. "I think I need a little help getting to the car." I sighed in resignation. This wasn't the first time I'd had to deal with this situation. I apologized to Emily and helped James to his feet, steadying him as best I could. That's when Ethan intervened. "Auntie Claire, do you need any help?" he asked, his voice full of genuine concern. "Yes, please," I said gratefully. "Your uncle is a little shaky tonight." Between the two of us, we managed to get James to the car and put him in the back seat. Ethan offered to drive us home, since I'd had a few glasses of wine and wasn't feeling confident behind the wheel. During the drive, Ethan and I talked about his studies and his plans for the future. I've always been so proud of him. He's ambitious, thoughtful, and seems to have his whole life figured out. Meanwhile, James snored softly in the back seat. When we got home, it took another team effort to get James inside and into bed. I took off his shoes as he mumbled incoherently in his sleep. Ethan waited in the doorway, looking hesitant, as if he didn't want to intrude. "Thanks, Ethan," I said with a tired smile. "I don't know what I would have done without your help tonight." "You're welcome, Aunt Claire. You know you can always count on me," he replied, his voice warm but his expression oddly intense. We made our way to the kitchen, where I poured us both glasses of water. As we sat in silence, I noticed that Ethan seemed oddly nervous, his shoulders tense, his gaze avoiding mine. "Is everything okay, Ethan? You seem a little nervous," I asked, concerned. He took a long sip of water before finally meeting my eyes. "Aunt Claire," he began hesitantly, "there's something I need to tell you. Do you have a moment?" His serious tone put me on alert. "Of course, Ethan. What are you thinking?" He ran a hand through his hair, a nervous habit he'd had since he was a boy. "It's complicated. There's someone I care about, a woman." My heart softened. My little Ethan was in love. "Oh, that's wonderful. Honey, why are you so nervous? Doesn't she feel the same way?" He let out a bitter laugh. "I wish it were that simple. The problem is, she's older than me. Much older. And she's married." It felt like the ground had fallen out from under me. My sweet, innocent Ethan, in love with a married woman. "Ethan, this is a very delicate situation. Are you absolutely sure about your feelings?" He nodded firmly. "I've never been so sure of anything in my life. I love her, Aunt Claire. I love her like I've never loved anyone before." "But Ethan," I whispered, my voice shaking, "she's married. This isn't right. You could ruin a entire family." "I know," he said, his voice breaking. "Believe me, I know. I've been fighting these feelings for months, but I can't hold them back any longer. I have to tell her. She has to know." I felt a deep pang of compassion. For him, I remembered how intense emotions can feel at his age, how absolute everything seems. "Ethan," I said gently, "I understand how strong your feelings are, but you have to think about the consequences. What happens if you tell her? Have you thought about how this might affect her, her family, even ours?" For a long moment, he was silent, then he sighed, his expression torn. Ethan stood there for a moment, visibly trying to gather his courage. Then he lifted his head and looked at me with an intensity that made my stomach turn. "Aunt Claire, the woman I'm in love with shared." What did you just say?" I stammered, instinctively backing away until my back hit the kitchen counter. Ethan took a step closer, his eyes filled with an emotion I didn't want to acknowledge. "I love you, Aunt Claire. I've loved you for as long as I can remember. At first, I thought it was just admiration. the kind of affection a nephew feels for his favorite aunt. But over time, I realized it was so much more. You're the most beautiful, intelligent, incredible woman I've ever known. My thoughts were a chaotic storm, impossible to untangle. This couldn't be real. It had to be a nightmare, a cruel joke. But the look in Ethan's eyes left no room for doubt. Ethan, no, you don't know what you're saying. This is wrong, on so many levels. I'm your aunt, for God's sake. I'm married to your uncle. There's a 20-year age difference between us. I tried to keep my voice steady, but the tremor betrayed me. He stepped closer, closing the space between us. I know it sounds crazy, Aunt Claire. Trust me, I've tried to fight it. I've dated other women. I've tried to distract myself, but nothing works. My feelings for you are stronger than anything I've ever felt before. He raised his hand as if to touch my face, but stopped halfway, hesitating. I froze, unable to move or form a coherent thought. Ethan, please, I whispered, desperate to stop this. You have to understand that this can't happen. We're a family. I'm married. What you're feeling isn't real love. It's confusion, a fantasy. But even as I said the words, a small, treacherous part of me began to doubt. How had I missed the way Ethan had looked at me all these years? How had I missed the lingering hugs, the way he always gravitated toward me at family gatherings? It's not a fantasy, Aunt Claire, he said sincerely. It's as real as this moment. As real as me here, pouring my heart out to you. I know you're scared. I know you think it's wrong, but love can never be wrong. And what I feel for you is the purest, truest love I've ever known. His words hit me like a wave, stirring up feelings I'd long since buried. Suddenly, I was acutely aware of how grown-up Ethan had become. He was no longer the little boy who used to sit on my lap. He was a strong, confident young man, one who looked at me with a passion that both terrified and captivated me. This can't be happening, I whispered to myself, shaking my head. Ethan, you need to leave, now. Let's forget this conversation ever happened, I said, my voice shaking with urgency. But he didn't move. Instead, he moved even closer, erasing the remaining space between us. I could feel the heat radiating from his body, smell the faint scent of his cologne mixed with the wine from dinner. I can't leave, Aunt Claire, he said softly. Not without telling you how I feel. Not without telling you that, to me, you're the most beautiful woman in the world. That every time I see you, my heart races. That every night I dream about you. His confession was intoxicating, clouding my judgment and making everything else fade into the background. Part of me wanted to push him away, scream at him to go away and never come back. But another part, a darker, more hidden part, wanted to lean in, to know what it would be like to have his lips touch mine. Ethan, please, I begged, though I wasn't sure what I was asking for anymore. And then it happened. Ethan closed the distance between us and kissed me. His lips were soft and warm and insistent. For a moment, I was too stunned to react. Then, to my own horror, I found myself kissing him back. It was as if a dam had burst, releasing feelings I hadn't even known I had. My hands tangled in his hair, pulling him closer. His body pressed against mine, pinning me against the counter. I didn't know how long the kiss lasted, seconds, minutes, an eternity. But when we finally pulled apart, we were both breathless, and reality crashed over me like a freight train. Oh my God, what have we done? I whispered in horror. Ethan, however, looked elated. His eyes shone with a mixture of love and desire that thrilled and terrified me. Ethan gently cupped my face, forcing me to meet his eyes. Aunt Claire, I know you're scared. I know you think this is wrong, but don't tell me you didn't feel it, that spark, that connection. I couldn't deny it. The kiss had awakened something in me, something that had been buried for years, but that didn't make it right. My heart raced. I knew I should ignore it, delete it, and move on. Instead, I texted, tomorrow at 3 p.m., coffee in the park. The next day, nervousness took over. I dressed carefully, choosing a simple dress that flattered me. At the coffee shop, Ethan was already there, sitting at a quiet table. His eyes lit up when he saw me, scrutinizing me in a way that made my cheeks flush. Claire, he said softly as I sat across from him, the tension between us palpable. Ethan, this has to stop, I began, but he interrupted me. What happened that night was real, he said, leaning forward. It was the most real thing I've ever felt. I closed my eyes, willing myself to stay strong. You're young, Ethan. Whatever you think you feel will pass. You'll meet someone your own age, someone who can give you a future. His voice was firm, his gaze unwavering. I don't want anyone else. I want you, and I know you felt the same way. I couldn't deny the truth of his words, but it didn't change anything. Ethan, I'm your aunt, I'm married. This is wrong on so many levels. Love is never wrong, he insisted, leaning closer. We can find a way, together. His words stabbed me like a dagger. Part of me wanted to believe him, to give in to the desire I couldn't deny. But the rational voice in my head screamed louder. This wasn't love, it was chaos, and it had to end. Ethan, you have to understand, this can't happen, no matter how we feel, I said softly. The cost would be too high. It would destroy our family, your parents. Have you ever thought about how this would affect them? He looked hurt, but he listened. But what about us? Don't we deserve to be happy? Happiness built on the pain of others never lasts, I replied. And think about it, we'd have to lie, hide, live in fear. That's not love. It's a fantasy. He was silent for a moment, then asked, how do I just forget how I feel about you? I took his hand. It won't be easy, but you're young. In time, these feelings will fade, and you'll find someone you can truly build a future with. Tears filled his eyes. I can't imagine loving anyone the way I love you. You will, I assured him. And when you do, you'll understand why it can't happen. He nodded slowly. I promise I'll try. We parted with an awkward hug. Watching him pull away, I felt both relief and regret. Had I done the right thing, or had I let something precious slip away? Weeks passed, and life returned to a semblance of normalcy. Ethan and I avoided being alone, or even making eye contact, at family gatherings. Then one night, I got a text. Asterisk, you were right. I met someone. Thank you. I felt relief, but also a pang of jealousy. Time passed. Ethan brought his new girlfriend to family events, and I could see how happy she made him. Though I still carried the secret of that night, I learned something about myself. Love can take unexpected forms, and sometimes the truest act of love is letting go. I often reflect on that moment of forbidden passion. Life is full of paths, and I often wonder, asterisk, what if? But I am at peace with my choice. I chose stability over fleeting passion, family over desire. Though my mind sometimes wanders to that night, I know in my heart that I did the right thing. That experience taught me about the complexity of love, the strength of commitment, and the power of doing what is right, even when it is hard. Years later, I look back on that night with a mixture of nostalgia and relief. It was a fleeting moment of madness, a spark that briefly ignited my life, only to about responsibility over desire. And while I often wonder what the other path might have held, I know I made the right decision. True love isn't just about passion, it's about commitment, sacrifice, and doing the right thing, even when it hurts. I hold this memory like a hidden treasure, a reminder that life can surprise us, that we're never too old to feel deeply. It taught me that love can take unexpected, even forbidden forms, but that what really matters is staying true to your values. In another life, perhaps Ethan and I could have pursued that passion, but in this life, we chose duty and responsibility. And while it's not always easy, I know it was the right decision. True love isn't just what we feel, it's what we do with those feelings. Thank you for listening. Please consider liking, subscribing, and commenting where you're watching from if you enjoy stories like this.